particular panel is really important. We've been talking all day about how we're connected for good. We're going to continue to talk about that. We all know how much media impacts everything. And, you know, I used to be the smartest guy in my home because I would read a lot, and I'd come home and say, hey, did you know about this? And people, I don't know. I come home now and I say, hey, did you hear about this? Oh, yeah, I heard about that, like, you know, on Twitter yesterday. So media is changing everything. The moderator for this particular panel is Carrie Sheffield. And I have to say, Carrie has been a very dedicated Silicon Harlem volunteer and a member. She's responsible for almost 50% of the speakers that are here. So she's used a lot of her media background and connections. She's a regular on a variety of networks that you'll see her as a speaker on television often. And she's a writer. She's written about, you know, through all the various publications, including her latest article in Forbes, which talks about Silicon Harlem and how these type of areas can be tech and innovation hubs. So I'm very proud of her. I really am. And we've met a while ago, and I've tried my best to just be a good sounding board for her. She's going to be launching some of her own. She has an entrepreneurial spirit, so she's launching her own platforms. So I'm very proud of her, and I'm excited that she's been given this opportunity to sort of put together this panel, moderate this panel. I know I'd love to talk about each person, but I'm going to let you do that. All right?
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Clayton, and thank you for all you're doing. Let's give it up for Clayton. Yeah, so I'm really excited to be here and see this great turnout and talk about media. And you're absolutely right, Clayton, and we all know the importance in terms of what media does for civil rights and social progress in this country. And so I'm really excited to talk about the trends we're seeing and how we can leverage social media and traditional media to advance society. So with that, I would love to talk about our panelists, and I'm just going to give sort of a brief introduction of them, and then I'm going to have each of them talk about 90 seconds each, sort of what brought them to media, what are they passionate about, and then I also asked them to give one prediction about the media industry that's going to happen within 5 years. So write this all down. We'll come back, put a Google Calendar in 5 years. We'll see if they were right, and you heard it here first. So we have with us Miss Jheri Hardaway, and Jheri is an author and producer. She's a woman of international mystery. So she's blogged throughout Europe, in Switzerland, London. She helped produce for NBC Universal the Olympics in London and in Sochi. And she is, we'll let her talk more about her work with that. Here we have David Paul Kuhn, and he is a political writer and political analyst and author. He has a second book that just came out, his first novel. It's out hot off the presses, and we'll talk a little bit more about some of the themes in his book, because he talks about digital journalism and sort of the decline of sort of the dead tree old forms of journalism and what that means for political analysis. He's been a senior writer for CBS News, and as well as at Politico. You might have heard of Politico, digital startup, where he and I used to actually, well, we didn't work there at the same time, but we both had worked at that place. But so that's David. And then we've got Maisha Walker, who is the founder and president, and let's hear it for female founders. So she's the founder and president of Message Medium, and we'll have her tell a little bit more about that. She's a contributor editor at Inc. magazine and the national president of the Black Ivy Alumni League. Did I get that
Everybody
right?
messes it up.
Okay. Sorry about that. And then last but not least, we have Michael Santorelli. He's the director, and let me make sure I get this right. He's with New York Law School, and he heads up their Communications Law and Policy Institute. It's sort of he was explaining it's sort of a think tank where they think longer term about issues shaping media when it comes to policy and law and that sort of thing. So thank you all, and if you could please just talk about, as I said, just more about how you see the theme of this panel as to how to monetize media. What brings you to the table today, and your prediction for media within the 5 years?
Okay, well, thank you for the warm introduction, and thank you everyone at Silicon Harlem. I'm thoroughly enjoying all the information I'm receiving today. I believe that Media is going to take an independent turn. I myself, I'm a blogger. I blog MissJheriWorldwide.com, and I've already seen successful and fruitful results of small people reading words to me that were big because they came from my heart. So even on the news today, you see a lot of Instagram posts or people citing tweets or Facebook posts. I really feel like us as independent content creators are going to be making a significant impact on news the way it is today. You used to have your respective journalists, and you still have, the journalists that, their words are, highly important, and their words are cultivated, based around the respective platforms that they're using. But I believe that as independent content creators, we're definitely making a mark in media, and our voices are so much more relevant because we're tied to the things that we're talking about. So that's kind of the direction that I think that we're going to go in. That's my 5-year prediction.
Thank you very much.
Okay, it's on. My name's David again, and I'm really concerned about the future of journalism. My novel concerns a lot with both the corruptive interplay of press and political operatives at the highest level, at the national level, but also the decline of media. Not to get depressive, but frankly, newspaper revenue has declined by more than a half in a decade. 1 in 3 newspaper jobs have disappeared. It used to be that classified advertising was 40% of all newspaper revenue. It's down between 70 and 75%, obviously because things like Craigslist replaced that. So, and the question is, what's replacing it, right? Is it BuzzFeed? Is it Huffington Post? And, and how much of that is quality amid what could be called pollution? So, cultural pollution, I mean. So I'm very concerned about the future of journalists, and I'm concerned about it from the standpoint of content creators. I won't name names, but I was having a conversation with a senior editor at the New Republic very, very recently, and he was looking at his iPhone, and he was enjoying the new just anyone who's gone the latest update, they have the Apple News app. I'm sure some of you use it, right? It's great. It's great for us as consumers. But when I see that app, I see terrible omens. When I see that Apple News app, when I see the New York Times partnering with Facebook, I'm very concerned that the good content creators are giving up control of their content, and that the ad revenue is going to Apple and Facebook. And I'm quite worried about the parasites destroying the host. That as content, as Facebook and Apple receive the revenue from the advertising, that the content creators are going to create the content and pay the editorial cost to send that reporter to do that journalism, but not reap the large benefits of that advertising. So I'm worried about that world, and less from a consumer standpoint, because I think the disruption is great for us as consumers. Now, I'm just not sure it's great for the country, and if not the world, from a standpoint of the quality of that content. My prediction for the future, my prediction for the future is that I'm not sure. I don't want to be dire, but I would say that obviously that journalism is increasingly going to look more like a wire, and that the Times and so forth are going to continuously fight not becoming a wire service, and that journalism will continue to sort of trend towards what I call echo chamber journalism for the like-minded. We've seen this trend begin over a decade ago, and it's just my hope that outlets like Vice can bring some good quality amid all this disruption. Thank you, and I'll try to hopefully
I'm
bring
going to
brighter
try not
clouds.
to cry, because that was really depressing. I've been in the digital industry for 20 years. So I have actually participated in the evolution of what you talked about. So not my fault, but I've witnessed and participated in a lot of that happening. So I have some similar concerns, but I'm also really excited, mainly because I think when you look across not just journalism, but media as a whole, if you include in that television, movies, novels, book publishing, as well as traditional journalism, there has been a complete upheaval in terms of not only who the content creators are, and I think it's very exciting to see the changes that are happening in terms of each one of us becoming publishers and being able to create and publish and distribute content to the people who are eager for a diversity of voices and perspectives. My concern, and so I'm very excited about that. I'm very excited about how empowered the average citizen is who wants to take more control over distributing information and being a voice, how much control they have over doing that. So that's very exciting to me. At the same time, that's also one of the reasons, the glut of available content is one of the reasons that traditional journalism is in so much turmoil right now. That and the fact that to be very kind of pleading about it, the advertising money just hasn't caught up, right? So the revenue to sustain more long form and deeply researched quality content just isn't there anymore. And I don't think the industry has quite settled in terms of how that's gonna play out. So I am concerned about that. I think it's a lot of the more traditional magazines that I've seen, Inc. magazine included, Black Enterprise included. So one prediction that I have is I think you are going to see more publications and perhaps other types of media looking for other ways. Essentially, a lot of that kind of media is an audience aggregator, right? So I think we're going to see those types of media looking for other ways to monetize those audiences. And you'll see publications like Inc. magazine and Black Enterprise, and I think coming up soon, some others, very large publications, even the New York Times, has been starting to do more live events, right? Because they've got these huge audiences that are very high quality, and they know they've got the demographic information, and so it's easier to sell a live event sponsorship these days than it is to sell an advertising, to generate advertising revenue online, which is where so much of the written content is going. But I do think that we also need to think about other kinds of media, like I said, book publishing, movies, television. I just read today that HBO has greenlighted how many of you guys know Issa Rae, the Awkward Black Girl series? Yes, all the Black women in the audience raised their hands. It's fantastic, and if you haven't seen it, you should. But she's a fantastic example of someone who is just really brilliant and came up with this series, published it on her own as a webinar, and now she's got a very hard-won deal with HBO, and they're going to be doing a series about her. And on the other side of that, you've got companies like Netflix, who now it seems kind of de rigueur, but it was a huge upheaval that within the last 5 years, Netflix started producing its own content that's now rivaling network and cable television. So, and I think along those same lines, you're starting to see companies like Amazon getting in the middle of the book publishing process. So I don't know if you guys know this, but if any of you are Kindle owners, you can now, and this is not new, it's been around for at least a year, but you can now get books on demand through Kindle. You can pay Amazon $9 or $10 a month and read an unlimited quantity of books, just like you can do on Netflix. And more recently, they've shifted the way that they pay authors so that instead of getting paid every time someone downloads your book, the way that you might do if you go to a store and buy a book, you now get paid as an author based on the quantity of pages that the reader has actually read. So I think, yes, and there's a lot of people, some people are very excited about this and some people think it's horrible. So I just think that the entire media industry is in complete turmoil and upheaval because of the way that the internet has kind of disintermediated and changed the owners, essentially, of content. But I do think, I don't know if it'll be in 5 years, but I do think that the dust will settle. I don't know that we're going to see the kind of broadly democratic content publishing that I would love to see. I do think we're going to start to see new sort of monopolies form that with companies who are simply a lot more aware, I should say, of exactly how the internet is changing the way people consume content.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I'm Michael. I am from New York Law School. So speaking of parasites, I represent the legal industry, which will likely eat into whatever you monetize on your platform. So, but no, seriously, I feel a little inadequate being up here with so many amazing people who are doers and who are engaged in this amazing industry. What we do at the school is sort of take a couple big steps back and look at the legal and regulatory sort of forces that are shaping these spaces, and that might be holding back new platforms, new content, new businesses from arising, things like that. So I'll keep my comments very short, just to so we can get back to the.
You're billable.
Right, exactly. So I'm counsel to the panel up here. So just looking out over 5 years, whenever I'm asked that question, I always think backwards first to get some context. And so where have we been and where have we come in the last 5 or 10 or 15 years? And in this space, when you think about it, as my fellow panelists were talking about, we've seen some really amazing and fundamental changes. I mean, that's self-evident to everyone in this room. But the pace of change, I think, has really accelerated in the last few years. And that's due to any number of things. We do a lot of work on sort of the network side, the pipes that carry your content, and those pipes have grown a lot in the last few years. That's sort of spurred changes on the edge in terms of the devices that you can use to access the content. So now we're a very mobile society in a lot of ways, and so we think about how to enable even more of that through things like spectrum reform and all the boring stuff that goes on behind your phone. So looking out over the next 5 years, I'm going to give a very non-controversial prediction, is that the pace of change will only accelerate. But as it accelerates, it will clash even more with the sort of incumbent players in this space. And what's increasingly ironic or natural when you look at how other sectors evolve is that some of the old guard of the companies that have been in this space for a long time, the Googles and the Facebooks, and others that have been around for a while and have established themselves, they're now the incumbents, and they're increasingly trying to leverage their standing to maybe ward off new entrants. And we see that outside of the media space and with services like Uber and Airbnb and things like that. So I think over the next 5 years, we'll see more of those types of clashes. And I was talking to David before this about copyright issues, which we do a little bit of, but there's another program at the school that focuses on that issue specifically. But copyright is a huge issue as well, and whether and how existing sort of old guard new media firms might try to exert copyright to squash some new entrants. So there's an opportunity there. So more clashes, unless and until policymakers at every level start actively updating these laws and policies. And there's huge opportunity. And so I think I'll focus on the opportunity here for Congress and for state legislators and for local policymakers to actively work with the old and the new to come up with policies and laws that actually make sense for this 21st century marketplace, rather than trying to apply 20th or even 19th century laws and policies to this space. Again, that's all the boring stuff that kind of goes on behind a lot of this. But that's what we're focused on. But I'll also add one more thing, just quickly. Another issue that we focus on is just sort of the digital inclusion piece, and making sure that, and I know that's a big theme of this conference, is getting people connected and online. And so one of our focus areas has been tearing down any barriers that may be holding people back from getting online. And one of the focuses, sort of the sub-focuses of that, is digital literacy training, and working with new users of every age, but also users across the spectrum, to become more knowledgeable in digital media, not only from a creation standpoint, but also from an engagement and sort of processing standpoint to make more informed users. And in our view, those are major barriers that need to be addressed across the continuum of education, and that could help create more creators and maybe tamp down some of the pollution potentially that you were talking about, and create a more informed and engaging base of content creators. So,
Thank you. Yes, this is a fantastic panel. Great mix of practitioners, academics, really good. So I had a few slides that if we could throw up just some data. I love data that I was hoping we could get some reaction from the panel about, AV team. So this is something that David touched on a little bit, just looking at, my undergrad degree is in print journalism, which is basically dying in terms of newspaper. And the ad revenue, as you can see, from newspapers has been trending down, and Google ad revenue is trending up. So this is the old adage that, you know, every company eventually will be a technology company. Certainly news seems to be no exception to that. So I'm really curious, just, you know, as people, you know, we are creators, we are people who, we work in content, you know, as opposed to technology. It seems those lines are going to be totally blurred in the future if we want to survive with this. So Jheri, I'm really interested, given that you're an independent blogger, how do you, and I've met a lot of people here at this conference who are independent bloggers, thinkers, how do you monetize and how do you protect your asset? How do you survive?
Well, I think it's very much keeping in mind like what your goal is. My goal at this point, I mean, I have written 2 books, Meet Me for Cheese and Chocolate, and Meet Me for Tea in London. So I am trying to sell books, but ad revenue is not something that is a priority for me. I write from my heart. I'm passionate about the things I write about. I write often about things I've experienced. My latest blog post, I went to the Million Man March, and I made my remarks about that and how I think that I can influence change in my community. So yes, I'm looking to generate revenue, but no, ads are not relevant to me. I don't have ads on my website because ads annoy me. When I go to websites and I have these pop-ups, or when I see, you know, that the cookies have noticed the things that I'm looking at, that creeps me out. I probably won't patronize a website like even like some of the major publications you guys are discussing. I feel like to a certain extent they instilled fear in people that, oh, if you go to this website, they're not credible, or if you know, are reading your information from this source, you know, then they probably don't know what they're talking about. But I choose to patronize people that are independent, and I choose to elevate my consciousness by knowing who I'm reading instead of reading it because it says New York Times, because it says USA Today. I don't think that I mean, credibility, yes, I appreciate the level of credibility, but at the same time, like, it's way more important to me to have an independent focus. And I can see, you know, in other bloggers or in bloggers, I can see where their motivations are, and I can see where they're coming from. You know, on Washington Post, you know, I feel like some people are writing for a check. I'm not writing for a check. I'm not writing for ad revenue. I'm writing because I have messages that need to be shared with my people. So, yeah, I think that there's just a fundamental difference in what the focus is.
Very interesting. Excellent. Can we cycle to the next slide? And I think that's a very interesting point that you made, Jheri, in terms of what makes you stand out. This, I used to work for an economist, and it was all about the signal to noise. How do you cut through the signal and get that, or cut through the noise and get that signal? And it seems, from what you're saying, you have the passion and the drive that motivates you beyond the paycheck, and then the paycheck ends up coming in the end.
I hope so.
I think this is an interesting graphic that just talks about things that David mentioned in his book. So there's a quote from his book that I thought I would read when he was talking about disruption and the disorder. And he's saying the disorder is good for a few. And he says that internet demands plenty of photography, not premium photography. People favor streaming over HD, ease over excellence. And with the words, as quantity trumps quality here too, people forgot what it felt like to experience a great read. So I'm going to play devil's advocate a little bit with you, David, and say, so you gave this very gloomy, you know, pessimistic view of journalism. I'm curious, though, what's your take on sort of what's happened with citizen journalism and how YouTube and Periscope and social media has really allowed people who were powerless, whether it's the Arab Spring or even here in the U.S., you know, pushing back against, you know, some police over brutality. What do you say in response to that?
Well, I mean, clearly, domestically, especially on police brutality, the ever-presence of just cameras on our phones has been a great thing for democracy. I mean, small d, just for the people. I think the Arab Spring showed that regimes, tyrannical regimes, can still persevere even in the age of the internet. I don't think that there was this revolution in Europe, attempted revolution in 1848, I think, and no one remembers it because all the monarchies won. And so I think that basically the Arab Spring has, it hit winter very quickly. So I think we can overemphasize the power of Twitter to change our world, et cetera. Again, here I become dark. But there is no doubt.
Be yourself.
There is no doubt that on the issue, particularly of police brutality, that, and I'm not sure it's a change in journalism as much as technology, that the very fact that we're all carrying cameras with us has really upended that world. And I mean, I can't even imagine the reforms we're seeing without this footage. I mean, I can't even conceive of what we're seeing happen.
But it's not well produced. Your problem is with
No.
quality versus
Well,
quantity.
listen, the public. I mean, there's no doubt that the public will take ease in streaming over a high quality video. They get it, especially if it's free, right? They'll clearly give up excellence for ease. And I'm worried. For example, refuse to join Amazon's, in my contract, Amazon's, the Netflixization of books, where they're effectively trying to get you to pay $10, I think it's $10 a month, because it's terrible for writers. But so I didn't join that. But I mean, it's not, you just got to fight that fight individually. But listen, the disruption in media, there's plenty of good. Obviously, if I lived in a third world country and I had no access to a library, the very ability to get almost any book on Google Books is wonderful. I don't live in a third world country. I'm worried I have first world concerns, and so that's the giant caveat to everything I'm saying. And I'm just worried about, as you know, whether it's monopoly law, which I think is largely concerned with consumers, right? If the consumers are hurt by the monopoly. But I think the other question in journalism that's going to happen, and in books, is whether certain monopolies undermine good content. So I'm just worried about the content creators, and I'm worried about Jheri here in like 15 years when she wants to monetize her heart, right? I mean, it's not that it's great what you're doing now, but I'm just concerned that the current disruption is wonderful for the consumers, it's wonderful for all of us, and I take part, and that when the ground settles, we could be worse for wear. And we'll just adjust to that world. I'll just add that, like, that's the nature of us. For example, if you read, any of us have ever read Civil War letters, the letters written by soldiers who never went to high school, they're amazingly eloquent. I'm startled by these farm boys who wrote these unbelievably eloquent letters. And that eloquence is gone. We've moved on. But I wish it existed. So I'm worried, but it's absolutely partly, some of the change is good. And I think a great example is the heightened concern over police brutality, or sort of the over-policing, hyper-aggressive policing. So I think that's a great example of where the changes in technology and in the ability for anybody to get some footage out immediately is a good thing, unequivocally good.
Right. I agree with you there. And I'm curious, Michael, as the attorney on the panel, what sort of protections would you recommend for anybody in the audience just looking to monetize their content? How can they protect themselves and make sure that they're getting paid for what they're producing?
Well, first of all, nothing I say is legal advice, so get that caveat out of the way. Also, not specifically my area of expertise, but certainly copyright, if you really want to protect your content and leverage as many rights as you have in it, certainly copywriting it and your platform, trademarking whatever brand you might try to develop and things like that. The sort of the IP, your intellectual property, is where the money comes from, essentially. So to the extent you can control your content and how it's used, that's certainly a big part of it. Also, engaging with partners if you want to monetize, things like that. That involves contracts and hiring lawyers that, students who are graduating from the law school in a few years. So it's a good job
Do you guys offer free legal counsel for creatives?
Well, no. Although there are a lot of clinics in the city at various law schools that provide free legal advice to startups. So you should look into. I know Fordham has one for intellectual property. I believe Brooklyn has a pretty good startup clinic. So to the extent that
Excellent.
you're looking for free legal advice.
Excellent. Can we cycle through the last 2 slides real fast?
Can I just,
and then
can I
wanna
just
get
make a note
Maisha's-
on that? Because I'm not a lawyer. But how many of you guys here are actually concerned about protecting your intellectual property? A few. Okay. So one of the things that I think it's important to understand is it's really hard to do that. The internet, and even before the internet, it's very easy to copy stuff and distribute it and pass it off as your own. The internet has just made it easier to do that. And I got some really great advice. I'm a big proponent of having a board of advisors as an entrepreneur, but I think it's also important just as a, professional or a human being. And I was recently very concerned about hiring someone to join my agency. And I got some great advice from a lawyer, actually, who
Surprisingly,
didn't even charge
okay,
me.
wow, okay. Pro bono.
Who didn't even charge me. But you have to remember that any kind of intellectual property protection that you put in place is only as good as your willingness to protect it. So if you have a copyright on something, but you're not willing or able to take someone to court and to be aggressive about following up on it, it's pretty useless. So you really, I'm not saying that you shouldn't protect it, but you should, go into that with your eyes open as an individual and understand the limitations of that protection if you're not willing to actually be aggressive about enforcing it.
Thank you. And I'm sorry, guys, we have to wrap it up because our next panel is ready. So I just wanted to talk about the slide real fast and get Jheri's thoughts, just since we are in Harlem, looking at issues of diversity. And if you could cycle to the next slide as well, looking at issues of gender and women in journalism. So journalism jobs in general are down, but women in journalism and in leadership positions in journalism, it's pretty dismal. So I'm just curious in terms of how can we think about improving diversity in these fields, and Maisha, feel free to chime in as well, but we do have to wrap things up. And then if you have any questions for our amazing panelists, please feel free to talk to them, but just outside. So, yes.
Well, I would definitely say these numbers are a major influencing factor on why I do things on my own. If I wait for somebody to hire me, then I would be hoping to be in one of these percentages. But by writing and blogging independently, I do what I want. And, my success is going to be my success. It's not going to be reflected on one of these media outlets. So I definitely am empowered by these because I know that I don't have to deal with that because I've taken my power back. I think that one thing that is essential is creating our own content, is telling our own stories. Like, who else is going to talk about our experience? Who else is going to articulate the state of racism in America? Like Charlie Rangel explained it perfectly earlier today. People are like, oh, racism, it's dead, this and that, but you don't experience it. You don't walk around brown. Like with religion, you can pick it up, and if you want to, you can put it down. You can't put down being brown. So, like I said, these statistics empower me actually to keep doing what I'm doing, because by being independent, I don't have to be concerned about, being a percentage. My work speaks for itself. So definitely give Maisha a moment.
Yeah, everything she said. keep it brief.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much, everybody. Let's give a round of applause to our panelists.